Hey everyone, I'm Rachel here with Ari, and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week we're on episode 330 asking, how do you find your genre? Before we start, don't forget to visit and follow our coffee page where you can access lots of goodies for free. And if you're in a position to support us, you can become a Merry Writer for just $2 a month and get access to exclusive content. Everything we earn on coffee goes into keeping the show going, and we really do appreciate any support. Before we started recording, Ari and I were talking about this topic that I came up with, and Ari was saying her piece about it, and I realized that she interpreted the question very different than how I meant it. So we're both going to be talking about the same thing but different, so you're gonna get like a 2-for-1 in this episode. Hooray! When I say how do you find your genre, I meant how do you find your best genre to write in? Like, what is your author's niche, so to speak? When I first started writing, I didn't know my genre right away because I didn't know that, I had so many ideas in so many different genres that I wanted to write them all. And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. There are plenty of multi-genre authors out there. So when you do first start writing, do you have to know your genre right away? No, absolutely not. I feel like the more you write, the more you will find your writing style and your writing voice, and therefore you will stumble upon your genre naturally. And you'll write things that you feel like, oh, I don't really enjoy writing this as much as I enjoy writing that. And it should just kind of happen naturally. Now, another way to find your genre when writing is to write what you know versus what you don't know. Writing what you know is the one of the biggest pieces of writing advice that every writer has ever received in their entire life, and I don't always necessarily agree with it. I do think you should write about what you know to a certain extent, but I also think you should be exploring what you don't know because, I mean, that's kind of part of writing in general, especially with fiction. You're exploring the unknown. And I think doing the research is a huge component to writing. I mean, it's one of my favorite parts is doing the research. But I mean, if I wrote what I know all the time, I would not be writing cozy mysteries because I've never been part of a murder before, thankfully. I'm not a detective. I don't know anything about investigating crimes other than what I've researched. Yes, I do know a couple of police officers. Could I reach out to them and interview them about what their job is like? Absolutely, I could. I've even gone to Barnes& Noble and I've taken the study guide to the detective's exam. I forget what the actual test is called, but I've taken the study guide and I've looked it over to see what they need to know and what they need to learn. And I used to babysit for a family where the father was going through the academy to become a firefighter, which I know being a firefighter is very different from being a police officer or a detective. But the academy itself, hearing his stories about the academy was just wild. So there are certain things that you don't get to experience firsthand, but it's still fun to explore them and then add your little twist on them as you're writing because it's fiction and you can do that. So sometimes finding your genre is just also finding what you're interested in, which kind of brings me to my next point, and just write about whatever you're drawn to and what you're interested in and what you're passionate about and what you want to know more about. I find those are the best ways to find your genre. When I first started writing, I wrote a lot of superhero stuff because I started writing with fan fiction and I loved the X-Men and Marvel comics and DC comics and stuff. Writing murder mysteries and things with ghosts never crossed my mind. And then when I did write my first cozy mystery, when I started writing George and Lila, it kind of dawned on me that mystery is my genre because growing up, that's all the stuff that I was gravitated towards. I grew up reading Hank the Cowdog, which was a children's, like a middle grade, early readers series about a dog detective. I read Warriors, which has like spiritual possession and ghost cats and the like. And there actually are murders in that, and there are mysteries. I've watched shows like Psych. I've played video games like Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. All of those are murder mysteries, and it's all my interest, and it never really occurred to me to sit down and write in that genre. So sometimes whatever you're interested in, you just kind of stumble upon it, and once you start writing it, it's very difficult to stop. But as long as you're having fun, then chances are that very well might be the genre that you're most likely to be be writing in. Like you're meant to be writing in. This was so bad. My notes for this episode are like piss poor, so that's what you get. Hopefully I made sense.
I'll be honest, I think it's because I think I got the confusion wrong because to me, when I started writing, I knew exactly what my genre was. Like 100%. Because I started writing between regular fantasy. I also did crime procedure because I spent my childhood watching Poirot and Columbo and NYPD Blue, and I was reading Ed McBain. So I was reading and watching all these like cop shows and detective shows. So that's what I was writing. I then moved into sci-fi because I was a huge Trekkie nerd. And you do things you enjoy when you're younger, things you kind of gravitate to, the entertainments, they do kind of leak in. So I kind of knew, yes, I'm writing sci-fi, yes, I'm writing crime procedure. I have to admit, when I started writing my Trinity Horror series many years ago, it's like, oh, it's urban fantasy. I was very aware it's in the real world with obviously some amendments to history and to the world itself, but it's in the real world. But there's obviously like, there's the vampires and the shifters and goblins, and I've got some what else have I got in there? Gargoyles and all sorts. However, it didn't dawn on me straight away that because it was preternatural fantasy and it was my main character was a private detective, that I would need to go back into that kind of police procedural detective thing myself. And the same with like how Rachel did it. I ended up having finding a lot of like detective books, like non-fiction detective books, and I even found a private detective course so you could become a private detective over in the UK. And I have the course. I never went through it, but I actually have it, and I've read through it a lot of the times. I just never took that next step and paid all the money to move through the course. But it's really useful because it gives you all sorts of things on like how to do surveillance and how to do interrogation and things you wouldn't think about. So yeah, I suppose that was the time when I wouldn't have realized that my genre could have touched on several things. It's not just preternatural fantasy and urban fantasy. It's kind of like mystery in a sense as well, and things like that, which is quite cool.
I need to
So
look that up.
what it
About
was
being a private investigator.
it was years ago, but I mean, I've got 2 binders full and it just goes through everything, and it even had a catalog for all the surveillance equipment. I
Oh
was a
my
bit
gosh.
I was a bit young when I was like a teenager, like early 20s, and I certainly did not have the disposable income to get myself like a pen that could record, or like a pocket camera. I mean, obviously you can get this stuff on Amazon now easily, but I did get all sorts of like little things I could get. It was like,
Oh my
yes,
God.
private detection.
That
It's
is
very
so cool.
it's very boring though. I think most private detection most private detectives are doing things like, infidelity and insurance fraud.
Yeah,
It's
I
not like
know. It's
murder because they don't usually do that.
yeah, it's very different than how the movies and stuff depict it, but
Yes,
still it's
but
all
that's
fun
that's why it's
info
called
to know.
fiction. So you can, it's like if you want your private
Yeah.
detective to deal with murders like Poirot does, you do that.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, so when I read it, I was like, oh, right, when you're publishing and you need to think about your keywords and you need to think about what genre you are under, you often need to think about subgenres because it's not just a case of I write fantasy. It's like, okay, which fantasy? And I figured that out recently when it was brought to my attention that some people didn't know what my first book was in the sense of genre, because obviously there's fantasy and there's dark fantasy and there's fantasy romance, and there's romantic fantasy, and a million other things like that. And I hadn't thought about it that way. It's been like, oh, it's fantasy. And I had to make a decision about what my first book was going to be and let people know, which I did. But you might be thinking, well, how do I figure out my subgenres? And one of the cool ways is if you have Goodreads, or if you can get on Goodreads, there is a way to look at several of the subgenres. So if you're on Goodreads and you go to the browse button, and then you've got like a drop down menu, and it talks about genre, and right at the bottom it says all genres. So if you click that, I'm doing it as I say it so I can talk you through it. You have
I'm
like
doing it too, and Goodreads is really slow right now.
it's really slow, yeah. So then you've got a browse, and it has all the main genres, like the main level genres, which are things like biography, children's, Christian, classics, comics, contemporary, crime, fantasy, things like that. So say we'll go to fantasy, because I'm a fantasy author. You click fantasy and it opens up and gives you related genres. And then you've got under here, you've got paranormal, urban fantasy, magic, supernatural, mythology, high fantasy, dragons, epic fantasy, fairy tales, dark fantasy, lore fantasy, heroic fantasy, fantasy of manners. I have no idea what fantasy of manners is. Weird fiction and things like that. And you can do that with any of them, and it can just give you that extra breakdown. So yes, you might write a fantasy, but is it a high fantasy? Is it a fantasy that's got mythology in it? Is it a fantasy that's very specifically dragons, like Fourth Wing? Is it elven fantasy, or let's be honest, fae fantasy, which seems to still be the most heavily written fantasy at the moment? And those are the ones you can kind of break down, because especially if you're on Amazon, you want those extra subgenres. Maybe it's dark fantasy, maybe it's romantic fantasy, maybe it's high fantasy, and it just gives you, they're also keywords, aren't they? So you get those for what you're doing. You can also go and look at Amazon, right? So if you went to Amazon and you've got and you use a comparison. So if you find books that you would compare to your book, and then you can see, wait a minute. I'm just gonna pick one while I'm doing this. So if you go into a book that's similar to yours in the sense, because you should know your comparative titles. I'm sure we've talked about that before, but if we haven't, well, tough, I can't remember. And then if you go down to product detail, you'll often find it says what that book's genre is and also what else it ranks in. And then you might find, oh, right, it ranks in paranormal romance or paranormal fantasy or epic fantasy. And if you're sat there going, actually, yeah, mine's paranormal fantasy and epic fantasy. And then you could use those. So that's how you can sort of pull up subgenres that might work well for your book. And again, become keywords that you can then use to find more keywords. And we'll definitely have to touch on keywords in another episode. I've just realized I don't think we've ever touched on keywords, have we?
I don't think we have either. I don't think we've ever talked about comparative titles either.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll make comparative titles and keywords a single topic and talk about that.
Yeah.
I think it's because
Because
I'm
we totally
in the
know what we're
depths of it.
talking about.
It's because I'm literally in the weeds with that at this moment. I am working out my keywords, and I'm pulling up the different genres for my book because I hadn't thought about it, and I'm having to do it, so it's forefront of my mind. So yeah, we'll have to make sure we talk about that.
Well, that's what made me laugh when you interpreted this topic so differently, because you can tell that you really are knee deep in the self-publishing world right now. But this is all good information to know, because if I had known, I didn't realize that on Goodreads they had all the subgenres listed like that. If I had known that years ago, I would not have spent years and years writing George and Lila and telling people it was a cozy mystery. It is not a cozy mystery. I finally figured that out a couple of years ago, but the first, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of my writing it, I kept calling it a cozy mystery. It's not. It's a soft-boiled detective mystery, which are two very different things.
Yes, yeah. But that's it. It's you kind of and there's new subgenres that keep creeping up all the time, and there's more things that keep that are coming out. I mean, we I can't think. I mean, romantasy is a new word that's been brought out. I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about romantasy, but that's a whole other issue. But yeah, so things we thought last time, oh yeah, this is my thing. It's if you're bringing out a book, you might want to just have another look, see what other types of genres and subgenres are out there, because there might be more that you never considered your book would go under, and now you're looking going, oh wow, yeah, that's actually, when I was writing my Trinity Heart series, if I've ever mentioned it before, I've called it Dark Heart. Dark Heart's actually book one. I always do that. I always name it the first book instead of the series title. But I have always known it to be preternatural fantasy, urban fantasy, because that's how I've known it, preternatural. Most people these days call it supernatural or paranormal, blah blah blah. Now I could use all of those because of what I have in those books, but I also like preternatural, and then other people might not even think of using preternatural. So again, it's one of those things that if you're doing anything with the publishing of your book, even if you've published a book and you've got all the genres that If the second book's coming out, go and have another look, because you might find another genre you can put it under. You might find another genre that leads you to another keyword, and we know how important keywords are. So yeah, that's all I have really. So yeah, use comparative titles and go on Goodreads and Amazon to help you find subgenres to set you off, at least to figure out where you want to go with where your book should fit in.
Yeah, and I think these subgenres and stuff, they're good to know even if it's not a well-known subgenre, it's still good as a marketing tactic. Like, even if you don't necessarily use it for a keyword or the category on Amazon or wherever you publish, you can still use it for marketing. Like, you know how on Instagram you see like every author under the sun with their book cover, and then it has the swirly arrows with like the list of tropes and stuff like that. If you do something like that, you can add that subgenre to that list, and it's just more eye-catching, and people will be like, "Oh, I don't know what that is. That sounds intriguing," and they might look it up, they might not. But I mean, compared to the other context clues that you put in that post with the tropes and stuff like that, people will get a better understanding of what the book may be like. Did that make any sense? I
It
don't know.
did. It did, yes.
Great. I'm a mess today, so it's just one of those days. As you can see, Ari and I interpreted it very differently, and Ari had a much better conversation to give you guys. She had way better information to give you guys. But I think if when you're just starting out writing and you're still trying to find your genre, and like I said, I'm not saying you need to pick one genre and stick with it. There are many multi-genre authors out there, myself included. Write whatever tickles your fancy and whatever you're passionate about, and everything will hopefully flow naturally and you'll be good to go. But if you want to take it that one step further and you're self-publishing or marketing or whatever, finding your genre and like really getting into the nitty-gritty of the subgenre and keywords and categories using Goodreads and Amazon and finding those comparative titles can really, really help you narrow down your genre to, actually talk about it, because unfortunately we need to tell people that we wrote books. But anyway, that's all we got. So now we want to hear your thoughts. How did you decide to write in your genre? And did you already know this Goodreads trick before we said something? Let's chat about it in the comments. And remember, we release a new episode every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing making your readers cry. So that'll be fun. And to ensure you don't miss it, hit the subscribe button on your way out. And if you'd like to learn more about us, check out our website at themerrywriterpodcast.podbean.com and our coffee page for more content. Thanks for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you guys next week. This podcast is brought to you by Too Many Ideas. We keep writing sequels. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.